For 4 years, Nora Hatch had been invisible, and she had worked very hard to stay that way. She was a night shift nurse at the Kellerman Veterans Care Center in rural eastern Tennessee, a long-term facility most people in the county couldn't find on a map without trying twice. She wore blue scrubs 2 sizes too large. She kept her dark hair pulled back tight. She did not make eye contact with strangers if she could help it, and she could almost always help it. The staff knew her as quiet. The patients knew her as the one who came back to check on you when she didn't have to. Nobody knew much else, and Nora preferred it exactly that way. On the night everything changed, the lobby of Kellerman had been turned into something it was never meant to be. Crystal stemware on folding tables, a string quartet wedged into the corner by the fire exit. 200 donors in their best clothes writing checks. They would deduct in April and forget by May. The Kellerman annual gala, the administration threw one every summer. Nora usually worked the ward and stayed clear of it, but the night charge nurse had called in sick, and Nora had taken her shift, which meant catering trays, which meant the lobby, which meant being visible in a room full of people she did not want to be visible to. She was refilling a water station near the back wall when the evening's keynote speaker took the microphone. His name was Gordon Whitfield. She had seen the poster in the lobby for 2 weeks. Best-selling author, national speaker, champion of America's heroes. His headshot showed a man with a surgeon's jaw and a game show host's smile. He had never served a single day. He had written 3 books about military sacrifice, all of them well-reviewed by people who had also never served a single day. And he charged $35,000 an appearance to stand in rooms exactly like this one and explain courage to the comfortable. "Look around you," Whitfield said, his voice filling the lobby like warm syrup. "Real sacrifice doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears scrubs." The room turned. Nora went still. "That woman right there." Whitfield's hand came up, one extended finger pointing directly at her across the lobby. "That's dedication. That's the quiet kind of heroism we don't celebrate nearly enough. She'll never know what the men in those beds went through. None of us can fully know. But she shows up. She does the small, humble work. And there is something beautiful in that." A warm murmur moved through the crowd. Someone near the front said, "Bless her heart." Nora looked at the picture in her hands. She set it down slowly on the table beside her. Her face stayed flat, her hands perfectly steady, because stillness was the only thing she had left in rooms like this. Stillness and the habit of reading exits, 3 of them. The main doors, the service corridor, the fire exit behind the string quartet. She had counted them when she walked in. She always counted them. Some habits didn't quit even when you begged them to. "Little lady," Whitfield called across the room, warm and easy, "can we get some water up here? All this talking dries a man out." The crowd chuckled softly. Nora carried the water to the front. She set the glass on the podium without looking at him. She turned to go. "See that," Whitfield said to the room, not even glancing down at her. "No fanfare, no ego. We could all learn something from people like her." Applause. Nora walked back toward the service corridor. She let the door close behind her and stood in the narrow hallway for exactly 4 seconds, breathing in through her nose the way her older brother Danny had taught her on their grandfather's porch when she was 9 years old. "Air comes in slow, Claire. You hold the middle. Let the end go easy." He had started calling her Claire the summer she was 8, after she'd stood dead calm through a thunderstorm that had every other kid on the porch in tears. Said she reminded him of some old photograph of a Civil War nurse he'd seen in a library book. Steady hands in the middle of chaos. It had stuck. Nobody else ever called her that. She had long since stopped correcting people who assumed it was nothing. Danny Hatch. Staff Sergeant, 7th Special Forces Group. Killed in action in a valley that wasn't on any map she was allowed to name, along with 4 other men she had loved like blood, on a night she had spent 4 years trying to convince herself was her fault. She had not been to the funeral. She had told herself it was safer not to go. She still wasn't sure if she believed that. She pushed through the ward doors and let the gala noise fall away behind her. The ward was long-term care. The men time had finished with and left in narrow beds under thin blankets. The night was slow and steady, the way she liked it. Medications at the right hours, vital signs checked and logged. A word here and there for the men who couldn't sleep. Bed 6 was awake, it was always awake. Roy Beckett, 73 years old, 2 tours in the Meeking Delta. A Purple Heart he kept in a coffee can under his bed, because he said award ceremonies made him feel like a zoo exhibit. His kidneys were giving out 1 week at a time. He had maybe 2 months left, and they had both stopped pretending otherwise. "Heard that windbag from all the way in here," Roy said when she came to check his IV line. Sounded like a man selling timeshares. "He has a bestseller." "So does every man who's never done a hard thing and figured out how to talk about it." Roy watched her hands on the IV line. He had been watching her hands for 4 years. "You're doing the thing again." "What thing?" "The thing where you look at the floor and make yourself small." Nora adjusted the drip rate and said nothing. "I've known two kinds of quiet in my life," Roy said. "The kind that doesn't have anything to say and the kind that has too much and made a decision not to say it." He tilted his head. "You're the second kind, Hatch. I knew it the first week you worked this ward. The way you move through a room, doorways, corners. You don't look at them because you're shy. You look at them because somebody trained you to. I read a lot of thriller novels." Roy smiled, the slow smile of a man who had lived long enough to know when he was being gently lied to and had decided to find it charming instead of insulting. "Something is coming tonight," he said. "I can feel it in the air. Old medics get that way. Decades out of the jungle and I can still feel a bad night coming up the road. Get some rest, Roy." "I'm telling you, Hatch." She tucked the blanket up under his chin. "I hear you," she said. "I'll keep my eyes open." "Keep more than your eyes open," he said and closed his own. At 9:41, the ambulance bay doors at the far end of the corridor blew open. Not the careful wheeling of a planned transfer. A crash, hard boots on linoleum, a voice, trained clipped already going hoarse, shouting for a trauma bay that Kellerman did not have. "GSW, bilateral entry, right thigh and lower abdomen. He's losing pressure fast. I need a physician right now." Nora set down the chart in her hands carefully, the way you set something down when your entire body has gone cold and extremely awake. The gurney came into view at the far end of the corridor. Two paramedics. A big man strapped to it, his shirt soaked through, one hand jammed hard into the crease of his right hip with 3 fingers pressed flat, holding an artery shut by hand, conserving himself. Not thrashing, not fighting, not screaming. Civilians panic when they bleed, Nora thought, and the thought came from somewhere very far back in her skull. Operators go still. The man on the gurney found her across 60 feet of fluorescent hallway, and his eyes locked onto her and did not move. "Nurse!" The lead paramedic's voice cracked like ice. "We've got nobody. The on-call went to the gala. The nearest level 1 is 45 minutes out and he doesn't have 45 minutes. Femoral is compromised and it's too high for a tourniquet. He is going to bleed out in this hallway." Nora's eyes moved over the man on the gurney the way they had moved over 100 men in 100 places she was not allowed to name. Gray skin, lips going pale at the edges, the black stain spreading and pulsing at his hip. Pulsing meant artery, meant minutes. And there, the small, ugly tug at his left collarbone with every breath, the slight rightward pull of his trachea. A tension pneumothorax building, trapped air against the lung, pressure climbing, squeezing the heart from the outside. 2 ways to die, racing each other. She had seen it before. She had promised herself, kneeling in dust on the far side of the world, while a man she loved bled out faster than she could pack the wound, that it would never beat her again. She started walking toward the gurney. "Nurse," the man's voice came out wet and thin. He was fighting to stay conscious and he was winning barely. Hasped it. Just the name. Like a man who had walked a long way to say it. "It's you. Thank God it's you." The lead paramedic blinked at her. "You know this guy?" Before she could answer, the man on the gurney turned his head and said 4 words that reached into Nora's chest and rearranged everything inside it. "Danny sent me, Hatch." The hallway tilted under her feet. Not physically. The physical world held steady. But something beneath it lurched and shifted, like a floor dropping away in a dream. Danny. Staff Sergeant Daniel Hatch. Her big brother, the man who had taught her to breathe. Who had vouched for her with his commanding officer when she was 22, and terrified and too proud to show it. Who had died in a valley 4 years ago, because someone had sold the route they were moving on for a wire transfer. And she had spent 4 years believing his blood was on her hands. Because she had been the one to recommend that valley. Because she had been the one who read the intelligence wrong. Because... He said. The man's face contracted with pain. "He said if he didn't come back, he made me promise, said you'd be here, said you'd know what to do. He was always right about you, Hatch. He never stopped being." A wet cough cut the sentence in half. Blood at the corner of his mouth, pink, frothy, chest involvement. The decision was already made. It had been made before she understood she was making it. Behind her, the gala crowd had pressed to the mouth of the corridor, drawn by the noise. She could hear Whitfield's voice over the murmur, climbing back toward the center of attention. "People, give them room. Let the professionals handle this. This is exactly what." Nora stopped walking. She turned. She looked at Gordon Whitfield with his microphone and his gray blazer and his $35,000 smile, and she said, very quietly, "Move." He blinked. "I beg your." "Move." He moved. She turned back to the gurney. "You." She pointed at the lead paramedic, 2 fingers snapped toward him. 14-gauge IV catheter, longest needle in your kit, right now, you, the second paramedic. 2 units saline, both lines wide open. Pressure bags if you have them. She turned to the charge nurse who had come running from the front desk. "Priya, trauma cart. Combat gauze if this building stocks it, regular gauze if it doesn't. Clear everyone in evening clothes out of this corridor. Right now, not in a minute. Nobody moved for exactly 1 second. Now, Nora said. The word was not loud. It carried the way a voice only carries when it has given orders under fire and been obeyed. The corridor came apart and jumped. She dropped to her knees in the spreading blood beside the gurney and put her bare hand into the wound. Not on it, into it. 3 stiffened fingers driven hard into the crease of the man's hip, pressing the femoral artery flat against the bony shelf of the pelvis. The only surface in the human body you could use to stop a junctional hemorrhage by hand. No tourniquet reached there. No clamp. Only someone who knew exactly where to push and was willing to hurt a man to keep him breathing. The black flood slowed. The man arched and groaned through his teeth. She looked him in the face. His eyes were dimming at the edges. "Stay with me," she said, and her voice dropped to something private between the two of them. "You came a long way to find me. You don't get to stop here. What's your name?" "Vela," he managed. "Senior Chief Marcus Vela." "Senior Chief Vela, you're going to look at my eyes and breathe when I tell you. In, hold, out slow. There you go." She slid the lead paramedic's larger hands over hers and locked them into position. "Do not lift, do not shift, do not get curious," she told him. "You are his blood pressure right now. You understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," the paramedic whispered, white to the gills. She turned her full attention to the chest. Her hands ran the ribs by feel, reading him the way she read everything. By touch and repetition and thousands of hours she had tried for 4 years to pretend she didn't have. The left side was drum-tight. The windpipe at the base of his throat had shifted slightly right, neck veins standing out like cords. "Needle," she said, hand up, palm open. Priya slapped the 14-gauge catheter into her grip without being asked twice. Nora's fingers walked the ribs, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. She had found this spot in helicopters and hillsides and the backs of trucks with no lights and no surgeon and no one to tell her she could do it. She uncapped the needle. From the back of the crowd, Whitfield found his voice again. "Someone stop her, she's a nurse. That is, somebody call a real hospital, she cannot just." Nora did not look up. She set the needle against the skin just above the third rib, angled it true, and drove it home in one smooth, controlled push. The hiss was unmistakable. Long, sharp, a rush of trapped air escaping through the catheter needle like pressure bleeding from a tire. The man's left chest dropped as the tension released. His next breath came in deeper, then deeper still. The blue at his lips faded toward gray, then toward something almost like pink. On the monitor, the numbers caught and began climbing, 68, 74, 80, 88 over 52 and rising. The corridor was completely silent. 200 people in their gala clothes, 2 paramedics, 1 charge nurse, 1 keynote speaker who had built a career telling other people's stories about courage. All of them watching a woman in oversized blue scrubs pull a man back from the edge of death with a needle and 3 fingers and nothing else. Whitfield opened his mouth. "Don't," Nora said without turning her head. He closed it. She packed the wound with the combat gauze. Priya held out, driving the hemostatic material hard into the space around the paramedic's locked fingers, sealing the pressure, counting 3 minutes in her head the way she had counted them, more times than she could stand to remember over more men than she would ever name. "Mark the time on his arm," she said. "This bleed is controlled by pressure, not repaired. He needs a vascular surgeon inside 40 minutes or he loses this leg. Call the helicopter now. Tell them junctional hemorrhage controlled in the field, tension pneumothorax decompressed, patient critical but stabilizing. Have vascular and thoracic standing by on the pad when they land." The lead paramedic stared at her over his stacked hands, color draining steadily from his face. "Who are you?" he said. "Nurses don't, that was who are you?" An older man near the front of the crowd stepped forward slowly, silver hair, straight posture, a small enamel pin on his lapel, the crossed rifles of an army infantryman. He had been watching her the entire time, and his face held something that was not fear, not pity, not gratitude. It was recognition. The specific recognition of a person who had seen something they understand from the inside. "Ma'am," he said, quietly enough that only the people nearest to him could hear. "I served 24 years. Retired Sergeant Major, 82nd Airborne. I know what I just watched happen on this floor." He raised his voice slightly, turning so the people around him could hear. "That was a manual junctional vascular control and a needle thoracic decompression. Performed in under 2 minutes with no surgical kit, no physician, no backup. I have seen that done exactly 3 times in my entire career. Never once by anyone who wasn't trained for it the way special operations medics are trained for it." He held her gaze and something rough moved into his voice. "My daughter was on a Black Hawk that went down in Afghanistan in 2019, and there was a combat medic aboard who worked on the wounded the same way you just worked on this man. Hands, instinct, no equipment to speak of, right up until the rescue team reached them. She came home because of it. I never learned that medic's name, never saw a face." He stopped, steadied himself. But I know the work when I see it twice. So whatever you were, ma'am, whoever trained those hands, someone owes you a debt that doesn't have a number." The corridor was very still. Nora rose to her feet. She let the paramedic take the pressure from her, talked him through the handoff in 2 sentences. She wiped her hands on the towel Priya held out. She did not curl her shoulders inward. Her chin stayed level. Her eyes came up off the floor and stayed there. She looked at Senior Chief Vila, alive and breathing on the gurney because of her hands. She looked at the retired Sergeant Major, who already knew the answer to the question the whole room was holding. Last, she looked at Gordon Whitfield, sitting very small in a folding chair he had not been standing near, his gray blazer slightly crooked, his microphone dangling from one hand, the salesman of other people's courage with nothing left in his catalog. "My name," she said, and her voice filled the lobby without effort, "is Nora Hatch." The helicopter was 6 minutes out when the lights went out. Not a flicker, a cut. The whole east wing dropped into sudden dark, monitors flatlined into silence. The emergency exit signs bled down to a thin arterial red. In the new darkness, a voice came from somewhere behind the crowd, calm, flat, trained. "Hatch." She knew the voice before she placed the face. "It's Tanner. Don't move." Zach Tanner. Call sign Torch. Her team's senior weapons sergeant for 7 years, 3 continents, 2 wars that never got names. She had pulled a tourniquet tight on his left thigh in a ditch, in a country she was never allowed to mention, and he had driven the truck the rest of the way out with his knee on the wheel. You did not forget a person like that. "Torch," she said. In the flesh. He materialized out of the red-edged dark, 2 men behind him moving the same way he moved. Quiet, corner to corner, reading threats not exits. "Vela came to us. We followed Vela." She understood it before he finished. Someone cut the power. They tracked him here. 6 of them, former contractors, the same people who sold your route 4 years ago. He paused to let that land. Vela spent 2 years building the case, names, accounts, the whole structure. The man who ran the operation, his name is Dorian Faust. Faust's crew hit Vela on the interstate 20 miles out. He drove here bleeding, because Danny told him to, right at the end. Said his sister was the only person left who would finish it. The end, the wall she had not let herself climb in 4 years. "Danny is gone," she said. It was not a question. 8 months ago, in his sleep, no pain. Tanner's voice softened by a degree that cost him something. His last clear week he made Vela make 3 promises: find you, give you the file, and tell you the truth he couldn't make himself say. What truth? "The valley wasn't your read, Nora. The route was clean. Faust sold it 6 hours before you moved, because a defense contractor paid him more than loyalty was worth. The intelligence failure wasn't yours. It was never yours. Danny knew it within a month. He spent 3 years trying to find you to say it." The corridor seemed to narrow around her. She looked down at her blood-red hands in the crimson emergency light. 4 years of carrying it. 4 years of making herself small and quiet and forgettable so the weight of it wouldn't show. 4 years of it was my fault, it was my fault, it was my fault, playing on a loop she had never once managed to turn off. She breathed in slow, held the middle, let the end go easy. "Fear is just weather, Claire," Danny used to say. "You wait it out, then you do the work." "Where is Faust now?" she said. "Coming through those doors in about 4 minutes, Tanner said. "He didn't come with his crew. He came for the file. He knows Vela had it." She was already thinking the floor plan, already seeing it as a board, 2 approaches. The ambulance bay and the eastern maintenance stairwell, same doctrine they would have used. Split force, 4 and 4. And at the end of the eastern stairwell was Ward B, where Roy Beckett was lying in bed 6 with his coffee can Purple Heart and his 2 months left and no way to run. She looked at Priya. "Get everyone in evening clothes out the south doors. Walk, don't run. Put Whitfield at the front and give him something to hold. His hands need to be busy or he'll start talking. Can you do that?" Priya's chin steadied. "Yes." "Good." She turned to Tanner. "Torch, take the bay. It's a choke point, 1 wide door they have to funnel. 2 of your guys can hold 4 all night if they keep their patience. Send your 3rd man to cover the stairwell with me." She looked down the dark corridor toward the ward. "The ward stays with me," she said. "Those men don't move and they don't run and they cannot protect themselves. Nobody reaches them tonight." Tanner looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, not with words, with the specific economy of a person who has agreed to something by the way they hold their body. "Your ground," he said. "Your call." She was already moving. The file was folded into a waterproof sleeve inside Vila's vest. She pressed it into Roy Beckett's hands in the red-edged dark of Ward B and folded his thin fingers around it. "Last job," she said. "Soldier to soldier, you hold this until I come back for it. Whatever you hear through that door, you hold the line." Roy's grip tightened with a strength that surprised her. "Held a perimeter in worse weather than this with worse men beside me," he said. "Go on, Hatch. I've got the package." She almost came apart right there. She could not afford to yet. She turned to face the dark corridor and went to work. A hospital at night is not an empty building. It is a building full of tools for anyone trained to look at an ordinary room and see 100 different ways to end a fight. She moved through the east corridor and seeded the ground the way her brother had taught her. A fire extinguisher heavy on its bracket, an oxygen cylinder green and cold against the wall of an alcove, a defibrillator charged and ready, a steel instrument tray at the junction where the stairwell door would open. Prepare the field before the enemy arrives. The fight is half won before the first shot. The stairwell door opened at 4 minutes and 12 seconds. 4 shapes, night vision, weapons up and moving smooth, confident men who had done this many times in many dark places and had never once run into the person who had prepared the ground for them. The first one never saw the oxygen cylinder. The second saw the fire extinguisher fog bloom across the corridor and ripped off his night vision, and by the time his naked eyes adjusted, Tanner's third man came out of the dark on his flank and it was over. The third went down when she brought the defibrillator paddles across in a controlled arc, enough charge to drop a large man without stopping his heart, because there is a difference between down and dead, and only the most disciplined fighters in the world ever learn to hold that line under pressure. The fourth was the smart one. He gave ground, found a wall, and swung his weapon toward Ward B, toward the door, toward the men who couldn't rise. She was already across the corridor before the barrel finished turning, inside his reach, the wrist taken, the barrel pointed up, the single shot punching through the ceiling tile and raining plaster dust down into the red dark. And then he was going down with the weight of her and the hard physics of leverage, the floor rising to meet him, and his rifle was spinning away. 4 men, under 90 seconds, not one round into the ward. From the bay, the sounds of Tanner's engagement came and then stopped. She keyed the radio. East secure, 4 down, none dead, all restrained. Tanner's voice came back tight. Bay secure, 3 down, a beat. Faust wasn't in the assault, Nora. He's not with his crew. Her blood went cold. Faust always led from the front, always. If he hadn't come through the bay and he hadn't come through the stairwell. She was running before the thought finished. She came through the ward door, low and quiet, and there he was. Dorian Faust, standing over Roy Beckett's bed in the thin red light, large and patient and calm, one hand extended and open. "The file, old man," Faust was saying. "The way you say something to a child. Hand it up, that's the whole deal. You go right back to sleep." Roy Beckett looked up at the man holding a pistol over his bed. 73 years old, 2 tours in the Mekong Delta, kidneys failing at whatever pace they felt like failing. He held the waterproof sleeve against his chest under the thin blanket, directly over his slow, stubborn old heart. "Son," Roy said, "I have been dying since February. You are going to have to come up with something a good deal more persuasive than that." Faust sighed, the sigh of a man whose patience had an end. He raised the pistol. "Faust." He turned toward the sound of his name. Nora stood in the doorway with the fog still curling around her ankles, her hands blood dark in the red light, her brother's steadiness sitting plain in her face. He had the look of a man who had calculated a great many risks in his career and had, for the first time in a long time, made a miscalculation. "Donovan's medic," he said slowly. "Hatch, I heard you went into the ground after that valley, heard you quit the work." "I did," she said. "You're the one who put me there." She took 1 step into the ward. He tracked her with the pistol. His gun hand had a tremor in it she did not think he was aware of. She saw it the way she saw everything, small, real, telling. "Easy," Faust said. "I take the file, I go back up through the maintenance access. Nobody else in this room gets hurt. Your old men, the nurse with the file. All you have to do is stand aside." "Put the weapon down, Dorian." "You know I can't do that." "Then you already know how this ends." He swung the pistol off her and onto Roy. That was the mistake. She crossed the room before his arm finished the arc, inside his reach, the wrist turned, the single shot going up into the ceiling, plaster raining across the beds, his own weight used against him, the floor, the bed frame. 3 cold, precise movements that her body remembered whether she wanted it to or not. And then Dorian Faust was face down on the linoleum of a forgotten veterans care facility, with his arm locked behind him, and no hope of breaking the angle. 4 years, she said, her voice very quiet and very even. 4 years I carried your work as mine. You sold my brother's route, and then you let me believe his blood was on my hands. She leaned her weight into the lock. You want me to finish it, I can feel you expecting me to. Faust said nothing, he knew better. No, she said. That's not who I am. She drew his hands behind his back and tied them with the cord from the nearest window blind, the nod of someone who had done it in the dark many times. You're going to stand up in a courtroom under bright lights, Dorian. Every name in that file is going to stand there with you. Every account number, every wire transfer, every man you sold for a paycheck. The whole rotten structure you built on top of my brother and his people. She stood. That isn't mercy. It's worse. It's permanent. She heard the police sirens before Tanner's voice came over the radio, and she knew exactly what that meant. 20 minutes on a fast night. Exactly as she had known. By the time the sun came up over the eastern ridge, it was over. Marcus Vela was in surgery at the county hospital. Stable. Expected to keep his life and his leg. The file had passed into federal hands, people with clearances and subpoena power and 2 years of patience ahead of them, dismantling everything Dorian Faust had built on the bodies of better people. He would stand trial that winter, and every name in the file would stand there with him, exactly as Nora had promised. Zach Tanner found her in the parking lot as the last police cruiser pulled out. He had the look she recognized, the look that preceded an offer. You know what I'm going to say, he told her. Yes. We could have you reactivated before noon. New credentials, new assignment. The people who funded Faust have been running for 4 years while you've been carrying trays. You're the one who broke this open. You should be the one to finish it. He paused. Danny would want you back in the fight. She looked at the building behind her. Through the lobby windows, she could see the dawn light coming gold down the long corridor toward Ward B. She thought about Roy Beckett, who had held a perimeter on the worst night of his life without making a sound, who had looked at her from the first week and seen past the scrubs and the low eyes and the careful smallness she had draped over herself like camouflage. She thought about the young veteran Priya had told her about last month. 26 years old, 2 tours in Syria, sitting in the intake waiting room for 4 hours because no one in the building knew how to reach him. No one spoke the language. No one had stood in the same place and looked out through the same eyes and come back from it. She looked at her hands. No, she said. Tanner blinked. I spent 4 years hiding because I thought making myself invisible was the same as being safe. She shook her head slowly. And before that, I spent 10 years believing the only way to matter was to be a weapon. I had it wrong both times, Torch. She looked at him. I'm not going back into the dark. And I'm not going back to carrying trays with my chin on the floor. Then what? She looked at the building, at the ward windows going pale gold with morning. This hospital is full of men who came home from the same places they sent us, and nobody here knows how to reach them. Nobody speaks the language. Nobody knows what a person's eyes are doing 3 years after something they can never say out loud. She held up her hands, still faintly marked from the night's work. I do, so I'm staying. I'm going to build something real, trauma medicine, crisis support, run by someone who has stood exactly where these men are standing and found a way back. She met his eyes. Danny didn't send Vela to me so I could disappear again. He sent him so I'd stop. Tanner was quiet for a moment. Then he did the thing that meant more than anything he could have said. He stood straight. He gave her one slow nod. The way one soldier acknowledges another without lifting a hand. Your brother would be proud of you, he said. He already was, she answered. Somebody made sure to tell me. 3 months later, the new wing at Kellerman opened. They had offered to name it for a senator or a major donor or anyone with enough money and a recognizable face. Nora told them no. She named it the Beckett Center, for an old army medic who had held a perimeter on the worst night of his life with a failing body and a stranger's secret pressed against his chest, and who had lived just long enough to read his name on the wall above the door before his tired lungs gently let him go. On the morning it opened, a young veteran came through the front entrance alone, hands shaking, unable to put a single word to what was wrong, certain that no living person in this building could possibly understand. A nurse in blue scrubs with a long dark braid and steady eyes sat down in the chair beside him. She didn't look at the floor. There was no curl left in her shoulders. She looked him dead in the face, soldier to soldier, and said the only words that have ever truly opened a door in a person who has locked all of theirs from the inside. I know, she said. I've been there too. Tell me where it starts, and we'll find the way back together. And to you, wherever you're listening from tonight, thank you for being here with me. If this story found something in you, hit that like button before you go, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're hearing this. I read every single one. If this is your first time at Quiet Badge's Stories, subscribe and stay a while. There are more stories like this one, and every one of them belongs to someone who earned it. I'll see you in the next one.